We've all been in that solo queue game before. It's the person with the most deaths that is the blame for the game. It's the person that fed in the early game. That's the reason entirely of why you lost. And there's this idea of losing a game in the fact that even if you try and lose gracefully, you can then say, well, I didn't lose us the game, so surely it was someone else because my score line reflects that. And this is kind of a faulty premise in and of itself, and the fact that you, in fact, did lose the game due to basically playing like a bitch because you didn't want to look like the guy that lost the game, right? With the poor stats line or whatnot and trying to accomplish things on the map, even sacrificing deaths in and of itself, right? And this also is true even more so with like a tank role, for instance, or maybe a support role to protect your carries, even though sometimes they might be stupid. And so it's very easy to fall into this pit within solo queue in the fact that just looking at someone's stat line, you then can put on the blame to them because of the stat of itself. And I see this more and more in solo queue, and I think this kind of conditions the entire player base to play as such of that I didn't lose the game. That's what everyone seems to be playing for within League of Legends, and it's pretty bad mentality, I think, to play with this mindset. And the fact that, everyone tries to blame this person for the entire fault of the entire team. And it's generally focused upon one person, whether it's, well, the jungler didn't gank enough and he didn't gank my lane. And then another guy will chime in, well, and he didn't gank my lane either. That's why we're all losing. Or, the ADC's feeding too much, or the top laner let fucking Fiora get super far ahead. And so therefore it's the top laner's fault only. That's the reason why we lost. And it's always someone else's fault, but that also doesn't excuse your own mistakes itself. It doesn't excuse your poor play or your decisions in order to influence the rest of the map, and also to help out maybe the person that is kind of losing you the match in some circumstances. And maybe you might not be, this faker or this apto, which can then affect that lane and help that lane and bring them up to where now they're in a winning position. Maybe you aren't that good, but you can at least do something in order to help someone else out. This is a team game, right? So there is some way that you can affect that person's lane or lane state. Maybe they're getting pushed in. Maybe they are pushing and they need a reset, and you tell them, hey, if you're the jungler, hey, I'm coming to give you a reset so that you could recall. I see you're at half HP. Let's go ahead and get this reset for you so that you can come back in, and you don't even have to use your teleport. Like, you can be fucking greedy about it if you want, because I know that's what you're going to do. You're just going to use the teleport for yourself, right? So there are always different tricks and different ways in which you can actually set up your entire team for success, even though that they're shitters too. And, it's the whole idea of, thinking that because someone else made a mistake, that's the reason why you entirely lost. And therefore, that excuses all of your mistakes too, because they aren't as egregious, right? It's just like the whole mentality of, you get pulled over by a cop, and there's a whole bunch of people speeding on the highway, and you talk to the officer, and you're just like, officer, like, there were so many other people speeding around me. It's like, yeah, that may be the case, but that doesn't fucking matter. You were still speeding, right? That doesn't excuse you speeding just because other people were speeding, right? That's not a defense in the face of the law, obviously. So it's a dumb supposition to make, to where your wrongdoing is therefore justified because other people were doing it around you. That doesn't make any fucking sense at all. That's how the world goes blind, so to speak, as that famous saying goes of, an eye for an eye. So I think this entire idea and this perpetuation of shifting blame and whatnot, or not taking your own mistakes and kind of reflecting on them, then goes into the idea of solo queue transitioning over into pro play. And I think this has conditioned pro players in order to think within this mindset that it's never their fault, right? Because there's always something far more critical that they can analyze when it comes to their teammates rather than themselves. And it becomes maybe more apparent for them because, they don't seem to see their own flaws as clearly as they see their teammates. And this is a very fucking bad mindset for players to have. And I think for one instance, in fact, of just the whole idea that I didn't lose the game, we can even point towards the most traditional role that seems to be afflicted from this sickness, which is mid laners. And the fact that a lot of mid laners within North America are not aggressive whatsoever. They play very passive. They're not willing to roam a lot. They're pretty greedy in terms of just their entire lane state. They try and just play tit for tat, right? They don't actually go aggressive. They don't try and punish someone or roll for like a 60-40, right? They never do that. They want the 70-30 every time. And if it's not that condition, they will never go for it. And this is the type of mentality that I think holds a lot of mid laners back. And in fact, through a lot of European mid laners that I have talked to in interviews and whatnot, the main criticism that they have whenever they come over here is that they feel like North American mid laners just play like complete pussies. They just don't go for any risky plays. And that's exactly what holds back North American mid laners in and of itself, because they're afraid to lose the game for their team. Because, like I said, they don't want to be the guy of, well, I lost my team the fucking game. And that's, I think, also too, because a lot of players within North America, just conditioned from solo queue, look at the most egregious play and say, that's why exactly we lost. That's the reason why. When in fact, it's like, if you would have just done a whole bunch of other things better, sure, that's the worst play. But if you would have done other things better, especially on your end, you could have counterbalanced that to where that play really wasn't that big of a deal. That death wasn't that big of a deal because you got an advantage maybe on another side of the other side of the map, right? So I do think, though, as the entire rebuttal to this idea is that you do sometimes need to play to not lose. But I think this only pertains to a lane matchup. This doesn't pertain to the entire team play or just team macro around the map. Because, yes, as like the famous lane that is to play to not lose is top lane, right? You get a very bad matchup. You have no help up there because it is an island. So you kind of just have to suffer and, let waves go, let a whole bunch of CS go, maybe let a tower plate go, whatever. You have to do what you have to do in order to survive, to then be useful later on within, team fights or whatever. And I think that's fine. And so that's not to confuse the two in terms of, playing to not lose specifically because it will help your team later. And then I don't want to lose this game for my team, right? There's a big difference because one is there is agency there that you could do versus the other is you are actually having some agency in terms of that you are playing for some other greater grand scheme plan. So there are too many professional teams that I see play like this. Of just they are playing to not lose, which is the worst fucking way to play League of Legends. It is good to be defensive, but you have to play offensive at some point, and especially within this current meta is even more important. Gone are the days of SKT to where they could turtle and then come back and completely smash you because you mess up and they're able to win a team fight, right? Those days are gone now because there's so much gold in the early game on the map that you can't actually do that because then you're going to be so far behind in gold. And especially considering that now there are a lot of incentives for the elemental drakes and the soul in order to get that big power spike. So you can't actually let that off the board. So that day is gone and past. There is no turtle style in the ways of what SKT did beforehand. That is long gone. So with that, if a team does this, if a professional team does this, I think it's a very bad decision, and I think it's been conditioned from the solo queue environment. And I think if a player does play like this, it's basically a statement to say both to the fans and both to their team that I cannot be put to blame as to why we lost this entire situation or this match. And like, I make that argument akin to Kevin Hart, the comedian, has this really good skit, and he's talking about arguing with women and how you can win any argument with a woman, with these like simple tricks or whatever. And he goes on to explain the scenario of, his girl is arguing with him, whatever. And then he's just like, say something like, well, I don't fucking like when you leave the microwave on. You leave the fucking microwave on all the goddamn time. And she's just completely off put because it makes zero sense and it doesn't justify the actions of what he did, like he was cheating on her or whatever the fuck. And he's just like, well, you fucking leave the microwave on all the time. And that's exactly what it's like when you're playing to not lose. You're just like, well, you fucking left the microwave on. And that's exactly how these players are playing, is they're playing to yell at the other person, for leaving the microwave on. And I think this example is a great instance that we can see in current history right now of, I think it goes down as to be one of the worst games in LCS history, which was Immortals versus Counter Logic Gaming Week 7. Y'all know what I'm talking about, to where basically both teams didn't do anything. CLG more egregious than Immortals. Immortals were able to claw their way back entirely and then, I believe, win the game. And it was just CLG just waiting and waiting and waiting because no one wanted to take responsibility for, initiating a play or making anything happen across the map. And so they just eventually fucking lost. And it was the most horrible win that I've ever seen in LCS history. And that's saying a lot given that I've been watching it since fucking season 3. So this is just an affliction of, I didn't lose us the game. That's that syndrome right there. You want to see that in professional play, you watch that fucking game, and it's really bad. I don't recommend it. So I think the entire idea of there's a faulty premise in the sense that I didn't lose us the game, and oftentimes it points towards the stat line, because that's to say that you didn't lose the game. But as we all know, stats don't tell everything within League of Legends anyways, because stats are pretty shitty, especially within professional play. And so to even point towards the stat line to say, hey, it's not my fault. You see how many deaths I have? And a lot of people do that in solo queue. Or they'll point towards damage dealt to champions, which really doesn't tell you a whole lot, especially if you have a poke champion and then someone else doesn't have a poke champion and they're just like, oh, well, why didn't you get most damage to champion? It's like, yeah, because I wasn't fucking playing Ezreal or Ziggs. Like, what do you expect? So the entire idea, I think, of not playing to lose is very bad. It permeates within solo queue, and it's injected itself within professional play. And I think this is quite possibly, in fact, I think the worst way to play League of Legends just in both instances.